Welcome to the second episode of Conversation with Great Minds, a podcast hosted by the Center for Development Studies. This is an engaging platform where we interact with leading economists and discuss the macroeconomic environment of the recent times with a critical lens.
It's a great honor and privilege to have with us Professor Arvind Subramanian, who was the former Chief Economic Advisor to the Government of India. Professor Subramanian is currently a Senior Fellow at Watson Institute for International and Public Affairs at Brown University. He has also held various positions at Ashoka University, Peterson Institute for International Economics, and Center for Global Development. Professor Subramanian's work spans across international economics, development economics, trade policy, and macroeconomic growth, with special focus on India, other emerging economies, and global institutions like WTO. In today's session, we will try to examine the deep-rooted issues that shape the economic trajectory of India. Sir, we know that the long-standing narrative of unconditional divergence has been overturned since mid-1980s, 90s. Poor income and middle-income countries have shown strong convergence. So, do you think that India will be able to sustain on the path of convergence, or will the structural constraints like informality, premature deindustrialization, will these pose a barrier to India's growth?
Yeah, that's a great question. You're referring to this unconditional convergence. It's a paper that Dev Patel, Justin Sandifer, and I wrote a few years ago, where we showed, just to explain to the audience or to the listeners what convergence means, that essentially what it means that on average, poorer countries start growing faster than rich countries so that they catch up or converge to the standard of living in advanced countries. So after around 1990, before that, some countries had done quite well, like the East Asian tigers and so on, and then of course China, followed by India. So while a few countries were actually converging, as a whole, developing countries were not converging. So what we found was that after the 1990s, on average, developing countries as a whole were converging. Now, two things to say. One is that, of course, since about 1980, India has been one of the fastest growing countries amongst emerging market countries. So clearly, India has been part of the convergence group, as it were. Now, what we have also found, or we kind of signaled in that, is that this phenomenon of convergence has actually slowed down in the last decade or so. So it is probably no longer the case that developing countries are catching up. However, India, I think, continues to be amongst those countries that are catching up. Now, as you know, there's a lot of controversy about how fast India is growing and so on. But even if India is growing not as fast as the official numbers suggest, it is still on a path of convergence, because if you grow, let's say, at 3.5% per capita, or let's say 3.5%, you're still growing faster than advanced economies. So even at 3.5% per capita GDP growth, India would still be converging.
So we know that countries like Vietnam and Indonesia, they have gained significantly from the manufacturing investment due to the China Plus One strategy. In your view, what are the specific factors that led to their relative success, and what are the weaknesses India faces in this?
Yeah. So it's true that the country that has probably been the most successful at this attracting the China Plus One investment has been Vietnam. Now, why has that happened? Of course, as China started getting richer, in some of the lower skill activities like apparel, footwear, it starts losing competitiveness, because once you become richer, wages rise. And so there was an organic process by which some of that production, which was located in China, started moving to other countries that had lower wages than China did. Now, of course, that begs the question: after all, there are many countries that have lower wages than China. Why did Vietnam, end up attracting most of it, and why not India? So that was and of course the probably the best reason is that Vietnam has a lot of political stability. They offer a very good business environment for foreign multinationals. They also probably offer a lot of subsidies to attract this, and they have a reasonably educated labor force, well-educated labor force. So I think and it's close to China, so that also helps. You're become part of the transport costs and things, makes it attractive for you to be part of the China supply chain. And so, Vietnam basically is like another China in terms of its strategy, export promotion, subsidies, good, the kind of conditions for doing business are quite good in Vietnam. So foreign investors find it a very attractive place, apart from the labor force. Now, remember that India has never been able to do a lot of manufacturing in the first place. We basically have always been a services-led economy. So I think that hangover of the past, where the foreigners and even domestic private investors feel that the risks of doing business are too high in India. And I think that's probably one of the main reasons there. And of course, also India, after 91, it opened up. But, in the last 6, 7, 8 years, it has once again started becoming more closed, increasing tariff barriers, imposing non-tariff barriers. But I think the main thing is that I think because of maybe arbitrary government action, the use of the enforcement directorate against, even investors, generally the perception is that the risk, and of course, the kind of regulatory, obstacles that there are in India. So both the costs and the risks of doing business are considered to be quite high. And that's why we've not been able to attract a lot of this investment that has been leaving China. But there is one exception to this rule, and that's what's happening in the state of Tamil Nadu, which has been able to, attract investment. I was just looking at the numbers the other day. I think since about 2013 or 14, in the last, I would say, 7 to 10 years, Tamil Nadu has increased its employment in organized manufacturing by about 1 billion people, or maybe a little bit more, but 1.25 million people, which is much more than any other state has. Investment has picked up. A lot of it is outward oriented, export oriented, and of course the big achievement in Tamil Nadu and also in Karnataka is almost 40 to 45% of the workforce in manufacturing is female. So it's not only that you have more employment in organized manufacturing, but a lot of it is female employment, which of course has very positive consequences for the rest of the economy. So the question is, why is Tamil Nadu able to do this but not other parts of India? That's kind of the big question. And as usual, the answers are, it's not rocket science that Tamil Nadu has been able to create an environment. See, Tamil Nadu has some natural strengths. It has a lot of technically educated labor force. All not the engineering colleges, the ITIs, all of this. So they have, I think people feel that, you can get a lot of very qualified managers, middle managers who can manage a labor force. Tamil Nadu, I think, has that in abundance. But I think what has struck me is that Tamil Nadu has been able to provide, some reassurance to investors that, the risks of doing business will be low in Tamil Nadu. And that's been true across governments in Tamil Nadu. for some reason, because I think they have a good bureaucracy which maintains this policy stability. They also offer a lot of incentives to investors. And as I said, they have a lot of labor managers, middle management and things. See, but all that being said, there is again a puzzle here because it's not just why is Tamil Nadu able to attract this and not other states. The thing is that Tamil Nadu is one of the richer states in India. So all the cheap labor in India is not in Tamil Nadu. It's in these other states, where wages are probably half, one-third what there is in Tamil Nadu, and yet they haven't been able to attract. And so really it's like, what is it about the policy environment, the conditions of doing business in Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, Jharkhand, etc., that is not able to attract all this. And I think that's the challenge for Indian policymakers.
So if we see India's export market, it is becoming increasingly skill intensive. So how do we sustain this increasingly skill intensive export without hitting the skilled labor constraint? Specifically, as Lewis curve is upward sloping for the manufacturing and service exports.
So yeah, I think you talk about the Lewis curve, right? I think there's the way to think about this, and I think you put it well, is that skilled labor is generally not in abundant supply in India. So the Lewis curve for skilled labor is probably turned up already, right? So although India seems to have, for the moment, kind of overcome that because, we are now doing more and more GCCs, global capability centers, which are very, skill labor intensive. So, so far, I think we've been able to find skilled labor in India so that the Lewis curve constraint has not been hitting. But of course, the puzzle again is that for unskilled manufacturing, the Lewis curve is totally flat, and yet we don't get investment there. So that's kind of the why we do manufacturing and not services. That kind of remains. But it is true that unless we really upgrade either our higher education system or our skill training, we will soon run into constraints at some point. Or to put it in your language, the Lewis curve will turn upward for services and skilled labor much more quickly than it will for unskilled labor.
So you have worked on how firms come up with multi-plans to reduce the political and regulatory risk, and how this finding reveals a lot more nuances about the Indian manufacturing sector. Also, we have policies like PLI and Make in India, which focus on increasing the manufacturing-led growth and also self-reliance. We have seen certain sectors have gained from it, but also there is limitation on job creation and spillover effects on certain other sectors. So, do you think these policies are a smart move, like kind of a smart industrial policy, aligning with all these realities, or are we into the risk of falling into the old pattern of a specific industrial growth without focusing on real competitiveness?
I mean, I think industrial policy now is like what everyone is doing or claim they're doing, or they want to do, aspire to be doing. And that's why we started this PLI. Now, of course, it's now been, I think, terminated because I think there's been a sense that the PLI thing hasn't worked. Well, one sector that did very well is electronics. That's done very well. And there are I think there are two views on this, right? One view says that it's done well because of incentives. But I think there's another view that says that it's not because of incentives per se, but just because we've been able to attract big manufacturers like Apple and Samsung and how we've attracted them, why they've come, owes to a number of reasons. They wanted to diversify away from China. But the point is that in electronics, we have been able to attract a very good foreign direct investment, and our exports have been picking up very rapidly. And so that's not so much a success of PLI, but some other things that we've done right, which allowed us to attract this investment. Now, what should we do going forward? I mean, the PLI program clearly, I think the government itself feels that it probably didn't work very successfully. So now they're trying to adapt and come up with employment-linked subsidies or other things. I think the more important question that the government has to ask is, why is the cost, why do investors perceive that the risks of doing business are too high in India? I think that's kind of the key question that they have to answer. Is it because of policy uncertainty? Is it because we're a closed economy? Is it because we make it very difficult to import components and inputs for exports? Is it that there's a lot of arbitrary tax administration, what you used to call tax terrorism? Also the regulatory landscape, very obscure, lots of barriers to entry. So I really think the government has to look at the totality of the business regime and then decide how to proceed. And I also think that the center and the states need to work much more closely together to be able to attract more and more investment.
A follow-up to this, like these policies, PLI in India, mainly focus on the capital-intensive sectors with less employment multipliers. So do you think these policies, a thrust on these policies, have the risk of exacerbating inequality? How do these policies can help in achieving an inclusive growth?
Yeah, see, and it's something I'm going to talk about this afternoon. I think in India, if you want to have inclusive and growth and with less inequality, the only good solution or sustainable solution is to have employment intensive growth. That means labor intensive manufacturing. That means labor intensive manufacturing exports. I mean, you can only employ a lot of people if if you have a large market. India does not have a large market. We think we're a big economy. We're not a big economy. The global market is much bigger than the domestic economy. So then it comes back to, and you made a very good point, that in the initial design of the PLI, a lot of the subsidies were allocated to very skill-intensive and capital-intensive sectors. So it had a bias towards reinforcing skill-intensive growth and therefore kind of increasing inequality. So I think when the government revisits this, I think it will hopefully keep that in mind, that if you're going to provide incentives, I think it should really be focused on trying to attract low-skill manufacturing.
Sir, in the light of these schemes, we would now like you to discuss some of the pressing concerns of monetary policy. The RBI in the recent years have prioritized inflation targeting in order to achieve economic stability. But it also comes with a trade-off, that is how to keep the rupee competitive for exports. So in this context, how do you view the situation of impossible trilemma playing out in India today? Also, to what extent would the currency, market-determined currency, be able to solve this problem of export competitiveness in price stability?
So I think, you've asked many questions. So let's look at it one by one. Let's talk about first the trilemma that you spoke about, right? And I think, I don't know whether listeners will know what the trilemma is. The trilemma is that if you open your capital account, right, then you will, and given that India is a country with reasonably good growth prospects where returns are high, you will attract a lot of foreign capital. And then if you get a lot of foreign capital, then keeping the real exchange rate competitive is going to be a long-run challenge, because more foreign capital will come in, there will be upward pressure on the currency, and of course, To some extent, and for some time, you can offset that if the RBI buys dollars and and builds up its foreign exchange reserves. But of course, that too has consequences because if you buy reserves, your money supply will go up, and that's kind of the trilemma, right? Your money supply will go up, and then maybe it'll undermine your inflation targeting. Or if you don't do it and you have to sterilize the intervention, then your interest rates will be higher and money will keep coming in. So it'll keep aggravating the problem. So I think that fundamentally, if you have an open capital account, you're stuck with this. I mean, it's always going to be difficult managing the currency. Now, what people will say is that if capital comes in and your economy becomes very productive, right, and you get a lot of productivity growth, then the exchange rate becoming stronger in response to that is not a problem. See, because remember, if your economy is becoming very productive, that means you can export more, can be more competitive. And then if the exchange rate strengthens, it reflects productivity growth. The problem is when capital comes in and you get pressures on the currency, but you don't get the underlying productivity growth. That's when you become uncompetitive. Because your currency becomes stronger, there isn't the associated productivity growth, so you become less competitive. So I think, therefore, it's a problem. Now, how is this related to the inflation targeting regime? See, in principle, an inflation targeting regime means, you focus on inflation, and whatever the exchange rate consequences, you take the consequences, which in this scenario, as I spelled out, the trilemma means that it will be a problem, or it has the potential to be a problem for competitiveness because of the exchange rate. So kind of there's no way to get out of this. Either you're very productive, in which case you can sustain a stronger currency, or you're just stuck. Now, what China did for a long time, the way the Chinese overcame this problem was to say, we're not going to open ourselves to capital. Their capital account was closed for a very long time. So that is why, even though they had very rapid productivity growth, they had very rapid export growth, but because they didn't keep attracting capital, they were able to, prevent the currency becoming stronger, and so they could ride their export growth for much longer because they had a relatively closed capital account. So they managed the trilemma by basically not having an open capital account for a very long time. We opened up our capital account, and so we exposed ourselves to the trilemma much earlier than China.
I would like to digress a little bit from our main topic. This is in the interest of our listeners who wants to pursue a career in research. So we would like to know your suggestions to suppose an MA student who wants to pursue a PhD in economics. How does one prepare for a good program, and what would the faculty look for while screening the applications, especially abroad? So if you could shed light on this, it would be very good.
I don't really know. I've just seen other students do this because I've not been part of selecting committees or anything like that. But in the US, it's a very, it's kind of pretty straightforward. You have to have very strong GREs, you have to have good grades, and you have to have strong recommendations from faculty. And in this, I think there's also a little bit kind of word of mouth that if you have recommendations from faculty that are known there, those recommendations will carry more weight, obviously. But I think that there's no kind of big secret to how you crack it. It's pretty standardized. I think you can fault it for being standardized, but otherwise, it's clear. GRE, grades, recommendations, and of course, if you've already done some research work, that also helps, in making your case. And of course, the other thing is that, even within the US, there are a range of universities which you can go to, and we know that what the requirements of the different universities are. I mean, some say very high, cutoffs in terms of GRE scores, cutoff in terms of your grades and things. But I think what you should keep in mind is that if you are really keen on a career in research, I think there are lots of places in the US that you could apply for, and you don't have to just focus on, top 5 or the top 10 or whatever, right? Lots of places you can go to, and really learn to become a researcher and do good research.
That was a very enriching discussion. I'm sure that we all have learned a lot and we got plenty to think about. And thank you very much for your time. We are very, very grateful for the opportunity. And thank you so much for joining us for this work.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.
Thank you.